It was a moment that Nicole Lunders never saw coming, the kind of news that shakes you to your very core, leaving you breathless and uncertain of what to believe. She had moved on from her past with Greg Biffle. Years had passed since their divorce, years filled with healing and growth. But when she saw his name flash across her screen, the news of his death in that tragic plane crash, something inside her snapped. She couldn't breathe. Her hands trembled, the reality not quite sinking in. Her eyes scanned the headline over and over, hoping, praying it was a mistake, that somehow someone had gotten it wrong. But as the minutes ticked by and more details emerged, the truth became undeniable. Greg, his wife Christina, and their 2 young children were gone. Her heart sank, and the world around her felt like it was crumbling. The man she once shared so much with, love, dreams, disappointments, was gone. And with him, a part of her past that she had thought was sealed away forever. For Nicole, it wasn't just the loss of Greg that hit her hardest. It was the weight of everything that had happened between them. The shared highs, the crushing lows, and the way their lives had intertwined in ways only they truly understood. She had been with him during the early days, before the spotlight, before the fame. She had seen Greg not just as a racer, but as a man with flaws, with dreams, with vulnerability. They had been partners in more ways than one, supporting each other through the chaos of his racing career, the pressures of the sport, and the intensity of life in the public eye. But after the news broke, it wasn't just about her pain. Nicole didn't want attention, didn't want sympathy. She just wanted to process the grief in her own way quietly, without the world watching. And so she did what felt right. She wrote a tribute, a heartfelt message that would never make the headlines, never be shared with the world in the same way the media had shared Greg's life. But it wasn't for the world. It was for her, for the small circle that truly understood what they had once shared. Her words were raw, vulnerable, honest. She spoke not just of the loss of Greg, but of the children, of Christina, of the unimaginable grief that now touched so many lives. She mourned not just her own connection to Greg, but the whole family. Her heart ached for the lives cut short, for the bright future that would never come to be. In that tribute, Nicole's pain was evident, but so was her empathy. She understood that grief doesn't follow a straight path. It wasn't about comparing losses or trying to minimize one hurt to make room for another. It was about acknowledging the complicated web of emotions that came with the end of Greg's life, the love they had shared, the family he had built after their marriage, and the profound loss of his children. But it wasn't just the public loss of a man known to so many. It was the private side of Greg that Nicole remembered so clearly. She reflected on the little things, the moments behind closed doors, the sarcasm he often used to mask his vulnerability, his stubbornness that sometimes drove her crazy, his competitive fire that never seemed to burn out. She thought of the long nights at the track, the days when his frustration would build, when doubts would creep in, but also the rare moments when they could simply laugh together, when the world outside felt distant and all that mattered was the 2 of them. Nicole didn't just miss Greg as a former husband, she missed him as a person, one who had once shared everything with her. And yet, she knew that life was never that simple. In her grief, there was a constant tug-of-war between remembering the man she once knew and mourning the man who was gone. As she sat there, reading through the messages that poured in from people who had once known them, Nicole felt a strange mixture of emotions. Some were from old friends, others from people who had watched Greg race and felt a personal connection to him. Some shared their condolences, others simply reminisced about the past. And while she appreciated every message, she couldn't bring herself to respond to them all. She wasn't ready to share her pain with anyone else. Not yet. It was in the quiet moments of reflection that Nicole's grief took on a different shape. There was the regret, the aching desire to have said things she hadn't. There was the love, still lingering in her heart for a man who had once been her world. And then there was the guilt. The strange, irrational guilt that she was still here, still breathing while Greg and his family were gone. It wasn't logical, she knew that, but grief doesn't always make sense. Sometimes it just is. And in that moment, Nicole realized something. Grief is a strange thing. It doesn't just disappear because time passes. It lingers, it evolves, and sometimes it hits when you least expect it. But as she sat there, feeling the weight of the past press down on her, she whispered softly, "I hope you found peace, Greg. I hope you found the peace you always deserved." The days following the news were a blur for Nicole. The world seemed to continue on, yet she felt frozen in place. As tributes poured in from all directions, friends, fans, colleagues, she couldn't escape the waves of emotion crashing over her. The racing world had lost a legend, but Nicole had lost a part of herself that she thought she had long since let go. Yet the memories kept flooding back, vivid and raw, reminding her of the life they had shared. It wasn't just the death of a man she once loved that shook her. It was the sudden reminder of the life they had built together. For years, Nicole had kept her distance from the spotlight, remaining in the background while Greg lived out his dream. But even when they were no longer together, she couldn't help but feel that their story was still intertwined. There had always been a part of her heart that never fully let go of Greg, and now, in the quiet aftermath of his death, that piece felt painfully exposed. This is where it gets interesting. Nicole had thought to herself as she began to process the situation. She had watched Greg grow from a young, hopeful racer to one of the most respected drivers in NASCAR. She had witnessed his rise, his struggles, his moments of brilliance, and his crashes, both on and off the track. They had been through so much together, and though they had separated years ago, it didn't erase the bond they had once shared. In a way, she had watched his dreams come true right before her eyes. But what made this grief so complicated was the fact that she wasn't just mourning the loss of her ex-husband. She was mourning the loss of the man she had once known so intimately. The man who, before NASCAR's spotlight consumed him, had been just a young guy with big dreams and a lot to prove. She remembered the way he was before fame, a little uncertain, still figuring himself out, hungry for success, but unsure how to get there. That was the Greg she had fallen in love with, the one she could still feel deep inside her no matter how much time had passed. And now, with his tragic death, all those memories resurfaced in waves. She thought about the early mornings when they would drive together, talking about the future, about everything they wanted to achieve. She remembered the first time Greg had really opened up to her about his dreams, the way his eyes lit up when he talked about racing. He had always been so passionate, so determined, and for a while, she had been right there with him, helping him navigate the highs and lows of his career. But those days were gone now, and what was left were just memories, bittersweet and painful. The grief wasn't just for the life they had shared, but for the life that could have been, for all the things that had never been said, for all the things that had never come to fruition. Nicole thought about the finality of it all. She could never call Greg again, never ask him what he was thinking, never share a laugh, never go for a drive, never just sit together in silence like they once did. Still, she knew that she had to find a way to honor the man he had become, to recognize the person he had grown into. It wasn't just about the racing legend that everyone knew. It was about remembering Greg for who he truly was, the man she had once stood beside. She understood now that grief wasn't just a result of death. It was a reflection of everything that had come before. And in the case of Greg, there had been so much love, so much history, so much that couldn't be forgotten, even if their paths had diverged. This is where it gets interesting. Nicole repeated to herself as she began to write her tribute. She didn't want to be just another voice in the crowd, didn't want her grief to be something that could be measured or compared. She wanted to keep it real, to express her emotions honestly without the need for validation or attention. She didn't want to be in the spotlight, not now, not with something so personal. She just wanted to mourn quietly, to remember Greg as he truly was, the man beneath the fame, the man she had loved once. In her tribute, she didn't just focus on Greg the racer, the public figure. She thought about the quieter moments, the times when the world wasn't watching. She remembered the way he would wind down after a race, his frustration evident, but also his relief when he could finally relax. She thought about the times he had opened up about his fears, his doubts, and his vulnerabilities. The world never saw that side of him, but Nicole had. And that was the Greg she mourned. But her grief wasn't confined to just him. She mourned the life Greg had built with Christina, a woman who had loved him deeply and fiercely. She mourned the children who had their entire futures ahead of them. Nicole didn't see Christina as a replacement. She saw her as someone who had shared a piece of Greg's life after their marriage ended. She couldn't help but feel sorrow for them too. They were the innocent ones in all of this, the ones whose futures had been cut short, leaving behind only the memories of what could have been. As Nicole wrote her tribute, she found herself reflecting on the complexities of grief. It wasn't simple, it wasn't linear. There were moments of anger, confusion, and regret, but there were also moments of peace. And through it all, there was love. Love for the man she had once shared her life with, love for the person he had become, and love for the family he had built after they parted ways. The world around her continued as it always does. The NASCAR community had begun to mourn in its own way. Tributes poured in, from legends of the sport to the fans who had cheered Greg on through every race. It wasn't just a loss of a driver. It was a loss of a piece of the sport's soul. And for those who had been closest to Greg, the grief was as much personal as it was professional. It was a reminder of how fragile life could be, how even the most indomitable spirits could be taken away in an instant. But for Nicole, it wasn't about the public tributes or the media coverage. It was about the small, private moments, the ones that no one else would ever see or understand. The way she felt when she opened her phone to find a message from someone she hadn't spoken to in years. A message of sympathy. A memory of Greg that only someone who had been there could understand. Those were the moments that hit her the hardest, when she realized how much of Greg's world had been shared with others, how many people had been touched by his spirit. It was a bittersweet comfort knowing that Greg's life had mattered to so many, but it didn't lessen the pain she felt every time she remembered that he was gone. Still, in the midst of this overwhelming grief, Nicole began to notice something else. Something she had overlooked in the chaos of the days following Greg's death. She was beginning to feel a sense of guilt. Not just the guilt that came from surviving when Greg and his family had perished, but a deeper, more personal kind. It was the guilt of wondering whether she had done enough for Greg during their time together, whether she had been the partner he needed her to be. It was a quiet, nagging feeling that crept in when she was alone, when she had time to reflect on everything that had come before. This is where it gets interesting, she thought to herself as she pondered her guilt. Was it rational? Probably not, but that didn't make it any less real. It was a part of grief, the need to second guess, to wonder about the what-ifs and if-onlys. What if things had been different between them? What if they had stayed together? What if she had supported him differently during the harder times? What if she had said things she never had the chance to? The questions seemed endless, each one more painful than the last, but Nicole couldn't help it. Guilt was part of mourning someone you had once loved so deeply. But it wasn't just about her guilt. As she reflected on Greg's life, on the person he had become, she realized that his death wasn't just a loss for her, it was a loss for the entire NASCAR community. There were so many who had watched him rise through the ranks, who had cheered for him on the track, who had admired his determination and his ability to adapt and learn. And in those moments of reflection, Nicole began to understand that Greg's legacy was bigger than just their shared past. It was about the impact he had made on so many others, on the fans who had watched him race, on the teammates who had learned from him, and on the young drivers who had looked up to him as a role model. What made this loss even harder to bear was the fact that Greg had been so much more than just a racer. He had been a teacher, a mentor, a friend. He had guided so many people along the way, offering advice, sharing his experiences, and pushing them to be better. It was a side of Greg that Nicole had always admired, the way he didn't just compete for himself, but for the people around him, for his team, for his family. He had been someone who took the time to lift others up, even when he was facing his own struggles. In the weeks after his death, tributes began to pour in from all over the NASCAR world. His former teammates, rivals, and even crew members took to social media to share their memories of Greg. Some recalled the fierce battles they had fought with him on the track, while others shared the quieter moments, the times when Greg had stepped up to help, to offer support when it was least expected. In the weeks after his death, tributes began to pour in from all over the NASCAR world. His former teammates, rivals, and even crew members took to social media to share their memories of Greg. Some recalled the fierce battles they had fought with him on the track, while others shared the quieter moments, the times when Greg had stepped up to help, to offer support when it was least expected. For Nicole, it was both comforting and heartbreaking to read these tributes. She felt a strange sense of pride in knowing that Greg had made such a difference in so many lives. But it also made the loss feel more profound. Because Greg wasn't just a man she had once known. He had been a part of something much bigger than the two of them. He had been a part of a community, a family, a sport that had shaped him and helped him become the man he had been. In the midst of the tributes and the outpouring of grief, Nicole found herself beginning to understand that Greg's impact wasn't just about the victories or the accomplishments. It was about the person he had been off the track, the way he had quietly made his mark on the lives of those around him. It was about the lessons he had taught, the friendships he had built, and the legacy he had left behind, one that would live on far beyond his death. Nicole's thoughts began to turn toward the family Greg had left behind, the one he had built after their marriage ended. Christina, his wife, and their children, lost in the same tragic crash. As much as Nicole felt the pain of losing Greg, she also felt the weight of losing them too. She didn't see Christina as someone who had replaced her. She saw her as another woman who had loved Greg fiercely, who had shared a life with him, who had helped him raise their children. It was a complicated, tangled grief, a grief that wasn't just about the loss of a former husband, but the loss of a family, a life, a future that had been stolen away too soon. It wasn't easy. Some days, the weight of the loss would hit her all over again, especially when she would see a photo of Greg or hear a song they used to listen to together. But over time, Nicole began to understand that grief wasn't a place you reached once and for all. It wasn't something you finished or moved on from. It was a part of life, something that would forever be with her in one way or another. But as she looked back on their shared memories, she saw them with a different lens. Instead of focusing on what was lost, she began to cherish the good moments, the laughter, the quiet afternoons, the excitement of their early days together. It wasn't about erasing the past or trying to push aside the pain. It was about integrating that loss into her life and finding meaning in it. Nicole had always been someone who valued the small moments. The big events, the flashy victories had never been what drew her to Greg in the first place. It was the simple things. The conversations that lasted long into the night, the moments of vulnerability they shared, the way Greg would hold her hand when the world seemed too overwhelming. Those were the things she missed the most, the things that no one else could ever take from her. In the weeks and months after Greg's death, Nicole felt the weight of his legacy, both the public and the private. The NASCAR world continued to mourn him, but they also celebrated his achievements. Tributes were made, from memorial laps at the tracks where he had made history, to the words spoken by those who had worked with him and admired him. His presence, though gone, was still deeply felt. His memory lived on in the stories shared by friends, teammates, and even fans who had watched him race from the stands. He was remembered not just for his victories, but for his character, his resilience, his quiet confidence, and his commitment to his craft. But while the world mourned Greg, Nicole found herself mourning him in a different way. It wasn't just about the man who had raced to victory. It was about the man she had once loved, the man she had shared a life with before the fame and the spotlight. She had been part of his journey, and now, in his absence, she realized that their time together had shaped who she was. The lessons Greg had taught her about love, about sacrifice, about resilience, had stayed with her, guiding her through the hardest parts of her grief. She knew that he had touched so many lives, that his impact had reached far beyond their own relationship, and that gave her some comfort. But there was also something else, a deeper understanding that came with time. Nicole realized that grief, like love, doesn't end when someone passes. It changes shape, it evolves, and it teaches you things about yourself that you never expected. She had always loved Greg, but now, in his absence, she found that her love for him had transformed. It was no longer about what they could have been or what they had lost. It was about honoring the person he had been, the moments they had shared, and the way he had shaped her life. In those quieter moments, when she would sit with her thoughts, Nicole found herself reflecting on the impact Greg had on her and on the world. His legacy wasn't just about racing statistics or championship titles. It was about the people he had touched, the lives he had changed, and the love he had shared. He had inspired others, driven them to be better, to push through their own challenges, to fight for what they believed in. And that was something that would never be erased. Nicole also found herself thinking about the Biffle family, the family Greg had left behind. Christina and their children had been part of his world for so many years, and in a way, they had been part of hers too. Her heart broke for them, for the future that was now lost, for the dreams that would never come to be. But she also knew that they would carry Greg's memory forward, that they would honor him in their own way. The love Greg had shared with them didn't end with his death. It would continue to grow, to be passed down to future generations. And Nicole took comfort in that, knowing that Greg's legacy would live on in the hearts of those who loved him. There were still days when the grief would feel overwhelming, still moments when she would find herself breaking down, feeling the weight of it all. But now, Nicole understood something that had eluded her in the early days of mourning. Grief wasn't about running from the pain, it was about allowing yourself to feel it, to process it, to learn from it. It was about accepting that some things in life could never be fixed, but that didn't mean they couldn't be honored. Nicole had come to terms with the fact that she would never truly move on from Greg's death, and in a way she didn't want to. He had been a part of her life for too long, shaped too many of her memories, for her to ever completely let go. But instead of allowing his death to define her, she allowed it to redefine her, a catalyst for growth, for understanding, and for peace. And as the tributes continued to pour in, as the NASCAR world kept Greg's memory alive, Nicole found herself at peace, knowing that Greg was finally at rest. His legacy would endure, not just in the trophies and the records, but in the hearts of those who had loved him. I hope you found it, Greg. I hope you found the peace you always deserved. And with that, Nicole whispered her final goodbye, not to the man she had once known, but to the man who had touched so many lives, whose spirit would live on long after his passing.